Adaptation of a text is taking an important idea from another text, such as certain themes, and producing them in a new, original way, but not losing the traditional roots and influences of that text. Good morning to you all. My name is Fezile Khadebe, and welcome to my presentation. The original text that I have chosen to look at today is Macbeth. Macbeth is a tragedy play by William Shakespeare, and it was probably first performed in 1606. The play begins with the brief appearance of a trio of witches and then moves to a military camp where the Scottish King Duncan hears the news of his generals Macbeth and Banquo have defeated two separate armies, one from Ireland and one from Norway. In the play, Macbeth is a Scottish general under the rule of King Duncan. Three witches tell Macbeth that he will become the King of Scotland. Macbeth is spurred by his ambition and his wife murdering King Duncan and acceding the throne. Some of the themes that we find in Macbeth is loyalty, guilt, ambition, and innocence. The language in which is used is Shakespearean language, and the text is written in English. There are a number of keywords in Macbeth which are used over and over again. This repetition reinforces their importance in the mind of the audience or reader and adds strongly to the overall atmosphere of the play. Some of these words include blood. Blood appears as a real substance all throughout the play. The word blood also appears a number of times as a symbol of the guilt that runs throughout the play. Night. Nighttime is traditionally associated with evil. The image of nighttime is also used by the characters to show the darkness of their feelings and the evil that they are doing. Time. References to time are an important aspect of Macbeth. And as time passes in the play, events become more and more intense and consequences more significant. The next adaptation that I'm going to look at now, the first one I'm going to look at now is Throne of Blood. Throne of Blood is a 1975 Japanese historical drama film co-written and directed by Akira Kurosawa. The film transposes the plot of William Shakespeare's play Macbeth from medieval Scotland to feudal Japan, with the stylistic elements drawn from Norse drama. Norse shows up everywhere in Throne of Blood, making the project a real fusion of cinema and theatre, and showing just how cinematic theatre can be in the hands of a great filmmaker. Norse elements include music and bass sets. Norse performing style, with its blend of dance, song, poetry, and mime, is antithetical to the realism and naturalism that invest acting in the West. Norse is a major form of classical Japanese dance drama that has been performed since the 14th century. It combines music, dance, and acting to communicate Buddhist themes. Kurosawa's chronicle is a highly selective one. However, as his literacy sources, his treatment of history and faithful to elements of the factual record while transposing them into poetic terms. Kurosawa's transposition of Macbeth points to the transcultural materials in the play, the common human experience that underlines it, but also vitiates the Shakespearean elements. Kurosawa's adaptation doesn't begin with the three witches or even Macbeth or Banquo riding together after successfully rooting a revolution, but with a chorus of sorts singing a bleak song about man's ambition. The three witches are not in Throne of Blood, nor is Macbeth, nor Banquo as per se. That's because Kurosawa didn't make a straightforward adaptation of Macbeth, but rather relocated the story to feudal Japan. The next adaptation that I'm going to look at is Umabata. Welcome Somi, born in Chesterfield, Durban in 1943, started writing at the age of 15. Welcome Somi was inspired to revive Umabata due to the release of Nelson Mandela. Welcome Somi's 1970 play Umabata is a remarkable phenomenon. Originally mounted in apartheid South Africa, the play was quickly picked up by the West as an archetypal example of foreign language Shakespeare. Msomi was able to monetize the play as commercial theatre. Msomi's adaptation of Macbeth tells the story of Shaka, a Zulu chief whose story bears resemblance to Macbeth. Msomi's text was originally performed in Zulu. Msomi closely adheres to Macbeth in terms of the structure and broad content of both scenes and speeches. The proximity of the two texts to one another makes it hard to avoid the language of fidelity criticism. Umabata really deviates from its source text, and in some ways this makes it more difficult to see Msomi's play as its own separate entity. Msomi deliberately chose to keep the material and plot as familiar to Western audiences as can be. To compare the two texts is to miss the significant elements of Umabata that make it extremely different to Macbeth. The text of Umabata is a vehicle for communicating elements of Zulu cultural traditions to Western audiences. Umabata makes additional use of multiple spheres of language in order to communicate. Some of these spheres is one, theatre space. In modern theatre, the audience's imagination is often strongly influenced through the use of lighting or set. However, in Umabata, this is achieved through the use of blocking. 2. Oral presentation. An Elizabethan would go to theatre to hear a play rather than to see it, whereas in Umabata there is abundance to hear. The play is understood through the abstract methods of gesture, rhythm, and annotation. 3. Physical performance. Dancing performance simultaneously assembled facing and backing onto the yard audience. A strong use of symbolism gave audiences the use to recognize the going-ons of the play. The next adaptation I'm going to look at is Roman Polanski's Macbeth. Roman Polanski, 1971, Macbeth is now considered one of the best film adaptations of Shakespeare, but it was first dismissed by its critic due to its use of nudity and violence and its association with Playboy magazine. Some of the themes that come out to play in Roman Polanski's Macbeth is historic recurrence, negativity, and internal ugliness in physically beautiful characters are added to Shakespeare's story of moral decline, which is presented in a mere realistic style. Director Roman Polanski had been interested in adapting a Shakespeare play since he was a student in Krakow, Poland. But he did not begin until after the murder of his pregnant wife. Following the murderer, Polanski sank into deep depression and was unhappy with the way the incident was depicted in the media. Polanski envisioned an adaptation of Macbeth and sought out his friend, British theatre critic Kenneth Tynan for his thorough knowledge of Shakespeare. In turn, Tynan was interested in working with Polanski because the director demonstrated what Tynan considered exactly the right combination of fantasy and violence. Tynan and Polanski found it challenging to adapt the text to suit the feel of film. Tynan wrote to Polanski saying, "The number one Macbeth problem is to see the events of the film from his point of view." In one scene, Polanski and Tynan wrote, "Lady Macbeth delivers her sleepwalking soliloquy in nude." Their decision was motivated by the fact that in this era, people used to sleep in nude. Some of the other challenges that these directors had were characters. People they had in mind at first to perform these characters declined, or rather rejected, the roles because they were unwilling to perform the nude scenes. Polanski's interpretation Polanski's interpretation of Macbeth is primarily based around the ideas of rapid change and cyclic world, violence, greed, and power. Such themes were a very prominent issue in society in the early 1970s. Therefore, they not only influenced his interpretation of the film, but also the audience that would appeal to. For example, the portrayal of Lady Macbeth, such as dominating the sexual person, can be viewed as a reflection, not portrayal, I'm sorry, the portraying, yes, I'm so sorry, the portraying of Lady Macbeth. I'm so sorry. For example, the portraying of Lady Macbeth as such a dominating and sexual person can be viewed as a reflection of the woman's liberal movement occurring at the time. These values and attitudes that Polanski utilizes in his portraying of Shakespeare's Macbeth are still relevant in today's society. As a global society, we are still experiencing rapid change as part of the technological revolution. Greed, violence, and power continue to be the root of all disruption in the world, and the cycle unrest continues. In conclusion, adaptation allows you as a director to explore your abilities and to be able to use someone else's work to your full potential and give it another meaning. For example, take the play I have chosen, Macbeth. Some people have difficulties with the language used, and I, as a South African director, can use that to my advantage to create an adaptation with a language in which my audience would understand. Thank you.